In today's video, I wanted to discuss international football, especially with the whole COVID situation. International tournaments have been rescheduled, qualifications have been rescheduled for the World Cup, and it's going to seem like a pretty difficult task to fix for FIFA and all the international adjudicators. Now, I wanted to discuss the overall keys to international success, mainly the teams that win them, what are the common occurrences among these teams, and also the problems with international football. So I've got problems and keys. Now I'm going to start off first with the problems of international play. Now the very first one is a common one. So we see that sometimes when players go off, they go off to play in the middle of a season, or these games usually for international play usually come at maybe the end of a big stretch of games for the club, and so players then go on break to play a qualifier or to go play a friendly. And the problem that this can present is that in crucial moments of the season, these international games can be very important, and they can be very important because they can cause players to be injured. Now, I wanted to look at an article. So in 2018, the 18th of October, we see here that 18 players were injured during this international break in the Premier League. And that's pretty big. Even I know it's early October, but this is something that can be really bad for these clubs, because all of a sudden these players, they just get injured out of nowhere, and then it hurts their season overall. We've seen players who get injured, not necessarily just playing for their country, but we've seen players get injured at crucial moments of the season, and it ruins their career. Fernando Torres, Ronaldo is another player who got injured during international play. Obviously, it was in the finals of the Euros, but these injuries in these lesser games can be important. They can affect the player's career overall, because maybe he doesn't recover from that injury well, or he doesn't have the time to. So, yeah, sending these players off to play games that maybe don't matter in the long run, or they're not important. It seems stupid for these clubs to let these players go, especially since they're the ones paying the wages. Another thing I wanted to highlight was that when these players go play for an international team, it's like not necessarily signing, but it's like playing for a whole nother club. You have a new manager, you have different teammates, you have a different coaching staff. There's a lot to get used to. And when these players go and play for these international teams, I think they play 2 to 4 games, and they play them over a 2-week period. Now, what's the difficulty in doing this? Well, when players have to play under a new manager, it means that they have a new style of play. In all managers, whether it's club, international, they need time. I mean, look at Frank Lampard. Frank Lampard, he recently signed for Chelsea at the start of the season, and people have already started discussing how the Chelsea board needs to give him time. They need to, he needs time to change the Chelsea culture. And that is very important to a manager, because when you have, new players, it's way more difficult to set these players up to work with your style, whatever it may be. Changing how you play. So, for example, if you play for a defensive team, right, where you're not used to pressing, maybe you play 11 men behind the ball. Whatever your style of play is, you have to adjust and play a different style depending on how your manager likes to play. And this can be a huge problem, because you play a maximum 4 games, right? In this style, you're at your 2 weeks, at this training ground. You go back to play for your club. Immediately, all that stuff goes out of your head. That stuff doesn't matter anymore, because you're now focusing on your club. You're focusing on the thing that is mattering for the whole season. So playing that different style for those 4 games won't necessarily be that impactful in the long run, because you play for a little while, then you leave, you go back to your club for maybe a month, 2 months, however long it is, then you come back and play with your national team again, a small amount of games, you go back. You're constantly taking in something new from your international manager, and then not necessarily throwing it out the window, but you don't really it doesn't stick in your brain. Like, it's not a habit. You can't, it's not easy for people to make habits and then break them that quickly, right? So other than just the manager, there's teammates. Playing with new teammates is always a difficulty. That's why sometimes players need maybe a half a year to adjust when they sign for a new club. Sometimes players can just automatically come in and start playing well. Other times players may need a whole year. So having to adjust not only just how you play, but how you play around your international teammates is, again, it's difficult. It's habitual. You need to build this habit, and then get rid of it, discard it until you come back and play internationally. You're not used to how communication is a key issue. If you don't know how to communicate amongst yourselves as a team, obviously I don't mean like language barrier wise. I mean like maybe what you're used to. Maybe you don't have to communicate something to your teammate at your club, but you have to do it for your international teammate because he's not used to playing with you, and so therefore gaps can happen. That's a lot to work on communication wise, and it's going to hurt the team overall in the end. Now let's look at what the keys are to the international success. Now I'll be looking at I'll be deriving from the 2004 Euros, the 2006 World Cup, the 2008 Euros, 2010 World Cup, 2012 Euros, 2014 World Cup, the 2016 Euros, 2018 World Cup, not the 2020 Euros. All of these international tournaments have something in common, if not most. The one thing I wanted to highlight is the manager. Now, the manager is always important to any successful team. The manager is always the most important. Now, the one thing I realized with these managers is that when you're playing internationally, you're playing with people from the same country. You speak the same language. Your culture is the same. So therefore, it's a lot easier for you guys to like assimilate and come together and be. It's easier to trust each other because you come from the same country. There's that familial understanding. Now, the managers, a lot of the time, the managers from these winning teams are from the same country. Spain had Vicente Del Bosque, France had Didier Deschamps, Germany had Joachim Löw, and Italy's manager in the 2006 World Cup was also Italian. Greece was the only team that didn't have a manager from their native country, but that's because Greece isn't great at football, so we'll just discard that. But the reason this is because it's easier for the manager to get the team's trust, because you communicate in the same language, so there isn't some kind of like you have the same culture, so there isn't this kind of like awkward like he speaks one language, the whole team speaks another, and then you kind of just like when you hang out or when you discuss tactics, it kind of feels awkward because you don't necessarily like understand the guy, and so sometimes you need a translator, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong when you're not able to speak your mind fully. Your words have to go through someone, like the game telephone. It goes through from you to this guy, and then this guy has to discuss it with the team, and that can be something of a problem. So these managers come from the same country. It's easier for them to communicate. The language barrier doesn't exist, so everything that you say, they straight up understand it. There is no difficulty. They can, what you're saying is what they have to listen to. Also, another thing I realized is that for France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, these four countries, in terms of their managers, these managers have built up a reputation. So in terms of trust, they trust these guys. There's even more of an established trust because first off, let's go with France. Didier Deschamps won the World Cup with France when he was a player. He also took and in his first I believe it was his first year, he took France to the finals in the Euros. So it's pretty good that these that these managers have a past that the international players can relate to. Maybe them as a kid, they looked up to this player international wise. Vicente Del Bosque, the Spanish manager, he was renowned on the club level. He won trophies at Real Madrid, and overall he was known to be a great manager. Italy's manager has a reputation as well. The manager at the time had a reputation for winning at club level, and so when he came onto the international level, he had a great reputation. The players trusted him. He's Italian. We can work with this guy. Germany, Joachim Löw, he's built himself up he's built Germany a reputation of being one of the most consistent international teams. Obviously, the past World Cup isn't good, but that's what what I wanted to highlight as well. So this isn't necessarily another factor that is as big as this isn't a key as big as the other ones, but I did want to list it anyway. So Germany and Spain, their players, they're known for playing for the same club. So if you look at Germany, almost half their players come from Bayern Munich alone, and the reason that is because one, they play for one of the biggest clubs in Europe, and two, these players know each other. You don't have to the communication problem is gone at that point. You maybe some of the players need to adjust in terms of communication, but it's not a lot. It's not a problem that is going to cause a lot of conflict within the team. So therefore, that's already something that's taken out. Spain, in their era of dominance from 2008 to 2012, they had mainly Real Madrid and Barcelona players that played in the same league. So therefore, the style, a lot of times league play, the style of play within a league is similar. So that's also another advantage. If playing for the same club is obviously way better, but playing in the same league is good enough. You're used to maybe seeing how this player plays. You're used to playing against them, so you know how you can work with him. So that's also another advantage that is really important for these teams. The most common factor amongst all these teams that have won these international tournaments over the last 2 decades has been their style of play, which was defensive. Now, I'm not going to go in depth into how defensive they played, whether it was 10 men behind the ball or whether they played pressing in terms of their defense. I'm not going to go that in depth, but the composition of these teams was defensive minded. Germany was the only team that wasn't that defensive minded, so I wouldn't necessarily, I would probably call them a more well-rounded team, in the sense that they didn't play just defensive football. They played attacking, but most of the teams that are on this list played 10 men behind the ball, defensive football. They would allow the pressure to come in. They would deal with it. They would have very rigid defensive lines, 2 lines of 4 in the midfield, and then they would get the ball out. They were trying to counterattack quickly. And the reason why these teams had the reason why a lot of these teams play defensive football is because it's easier to, adjust for a team. These tournaments, right? When these tournaments come around, they come around at the end of the season, right? So when players are tired, they can't really run as much anymore. They come in with maybe a week's preparation. So after the season and these players, they fly in, they have a week when this tournament starts. And 3, the qualification runs or friendly runs don't matter because, you at that time, you were playing good as a team, but this is a whole, you didn't play as a team the whole season. You took breaks, you met up, then you left. So these defensive styles really help these players because they don't have to run as much. So therefore fatigue won't be a problem. The amount of times that you'll have to play from behind, so the amount of pressure that you have to deal with, is not as much as if you were an attacking based team. So Belgium is one of those teams where they would concede a lot of goals in some of their games, so they'd have to play from behind, and that adds pressure onto these players. They have to run more, they're more fatigued. So defensively, this is the most logical way to play these international tournaments. You don't rely on individual talent as much in the sense of the defensive side of the ball, because everyone's got to play defensive. You've got to play defensive, limit their chances, limit the amount of goals they can score, and then we'll play counterattacking. We can, as 10 men behind the ball, we can move up as a unit, play quick counterattacking football, and get these teams in. I mean, Italy was one of the first ones to really put this in place. I know Greece won the Euros in 2004 playing a similar way, but a lot of people believe that was a fluke, and it was a fluke. But Italy was, even in Serie A lot of the teams in Italy were playing defensive football, 10 men behind the ball. And it wasn't until when Italy won the World Cup in 2006 that teams started to realize that, playing defensively is probably your best bet, when it comes internationally, because it's just a lot easier to play. It's a lot easier to play as a defensive team, and it makes it harder for the opponents because you get one goal, that even adds more pressure onto them because now they have to score against your defensive wall. France was definitely a team that played defensive football. I mean, they have one of the best midfielding duos in the world. They have Pogba and Kante. Kante can get you the ball back anywhere, and Pogba's just a giant. He can get you the ball back and dribble and score. He can do everything. And on top of that, France had Varane, a great center back, and Umtiti, also another good center back. They had 2 new fullbacks who were also coming in, Pavard and Theo Hernandez. So overall, and the only attacking players they had was Giroud, a slow player, a target man. Griezmann, who's good on the ball but doesn't necessarily want to run a lot, and Mbappe, someone who can dribble, quickly. He can catch, he can find those gaps. So overall, they were a defensive-minded team. They played those men behind the ball. Giroud would be our target man, so if you got the ball back early, you could hit him, and then he can play between Griezmann and Mbappe. So what I wanted to say is these teams aren't just, this isn't the only way to win in football. I'm only saying that this for international tournaments because adjustment and time is needed for club football, but international, where it's a tournament, every 4 years, at the end of the season when you're tired, defensive football requires the least in terms of running, and it's easier to get your players playing that style of play. The communication, you can start with communication there. You can say, all right, this is what we'll do defensively. This is what you got to do. This is where you got to be. The problems of communication are eliminated. Fatigue is eliminated, and overall form isn't relied on. That's why teams like Argentina suffer. That's why Messi suffers. Sorry, not Argentina. Argentina. They rely on those individual skill to carry them through these tournaments, and their defense is abysmal. Di Maria, great talent. Aguero, great talent. Higuain, Dybala, Messi, all of these great talents, especially Messi. And the problem is that they do rely on Messi to create a lot, and Messi, and they just don't realize that their defense is the biggest problem. And this is where Ronaldo may have had an advantage because his manager had realized that Ronaldo will get you your goals, and so the only thing that we have to worry about is making sure that we concede less goals, make his job easier, and we'll leave the rest to him. This is the one time where maybe the only worry was creativity and making sure that he gets those chances. Bernardo Silva, this was Bernardo Silva's breakout tournament where a lot of the eyes started to get on him, and so and as we saw, Ronaldo scored those goals. Portugal got to the final and they won it. Those are the that is how international teams succeed at the international level. Italy brought about the idea of defensive football in their country, in Serie A, in the world. Spain had refined it. Spain had taken that idea and had built it into a dynasty which lasted 4 years, where they won 2 Euros and a World Cup. And therefore, France then saw that Portugal won the Euros that way, because inadvertently France had lost the Euros in 2016 to Portugal, a defensive team. And France was playing quite attacking that tournament. They weren't playing that defensive style of football that they played in the World Cup. And so they realized that. They're like, hey, let's just make sure we don't concede goals, and then, we can rely on our attacking talent to get us the rest of the way. So, if you like the video, if you like my content, subscribe. If you have anything to say, comment below, and thanks for watching.